Every time Shedeur Sanders enters a new situation, the conversation instantly turns skeptical. Not cautious, not patient, skeptical, as if success in the past somehow counts against him instead of for him. And now, with the Cleveland Browns, that same cycle is starting all over again. Some voices are already questioning whether he's the guy. Others are quietly blaming him for problems that existed long before he arrived. And a few are acting like this situation is uniquely difficult, as if Sanders hasn't built his entire career walking into chaos and being told, "Fix it." Here's the part that doesn't add up. When teams struggle, quarterbacks usually get excuses: bad line, no weapons, poor coaching. But when it comes to Shedeur, those explanations disappear. Instead, the focus shifts to his confidence, his tone, his mindset, things that have nothing to do with throwing the football and everything to do with perception. And that's why this moment matters. Because Cleveland isn't just deciding whether a quarterback can win games. They're deciding whether they're finally ready to build properly, or if they're about to repeat the same mistake they've made for years, putting a young QB in a broken situation and acting surprised when things don't magically fix themselves overnight. What makes this even more interesting is what's happening around him. Coaching rumors, front office questions, outside voices getting louder, all of it creating pressure before the foundation is even set. So the real question is whether Shedeur Sanders can handle Cleveland. It's whether Cleveland is finally ready to handle a quarterback like him. And once you look at his past, the answer might make a lot of people uncomfortable. Here's the part that keeps getting ignored, and it's not a small detail. Everywhere Shedeur Sanders has gone, the pattern has been the same. He didn't walk into stable programs. He didn't inherit stacked rosters or polished systems. He walked into messes, programs that were losing, overlooked, and written off long before he ever took a snap. And somehow, those situations always ended the same way: competitive, relevant, and winning. At Jackson State, the expectations were minimal, limited resources, little national respect. And yet, once Sanders took over, the program exploded. Back-to-back dominant seasons, undefeated conference runs. Suddenly, a team no one talked about became a weekly headline. That didn't happen by accident. Then came Colorado, a program coming off a 1-11 season. Low confidence, empty optimism. Most quarterbacks would have avoided that situation entirely. Sanders didn't. In his first year, the turnaround wasn't perfect, but it was immediate. Progress showed. And by year 2, the results were impossible to dismiss. 9 wins, relevance restored, and a team that went from punchline to threat. That matters now more than ever. Because Cleveland isn't some brand new challenge. It's familiar territory. A team with pieces but no cohesion. A roster with talent but missing structure. The same type of environment Sanders has been dropped into repeatedly. The difference this time: the margin for error is smaller, the spotlight is harsher, and patience is thinner. But if history tells us anything, it's that chaos has never scared him. It's where he's done his best work. And that's exactly why the next part of this story hits harder. Because the criticism he's facing now has very little to do with football. This is where the narrative starts to drift and where frustration sets in. Because when people criticize Shedeur Sanders, it's rarely about what he's done on the field. The conversation shifts quickly. Suddenly, it's about how he talks, how he carries himself, how confident he sounds when he speaks about his own resume. And somehow, that confidence gets rebranded as arrogance. During the draft process, that misread was on full display. Sanders didn't promise instant greatness. He didn't demand special treatment. He pointed to his track record. He explained clearly what he'd already done, turning losing programs into competitive ones. But instead of hearing experience, some people heard entitlement. Instead of hearing honesty, they heard ego. That reaction didn't come out of nowhere. There's been constant speculation that his connection to Coach Prime played a role. That jealousy, Resentment or fatigue with the spotlight bled into how he was evaluated. Nothing proven, nothing confirmed. But when the same criticisms repeat without changing, people start asking why. And here's the contradiction. The league celebrates quarterbacks who believe in themselves, until that confidence comes from someone who didn't follow the traditional path. Then it becomes a problem. Sanders didn't come up through a powerhouse system. He helped build them, and that seems to make people uncomfortable. What's being lost in all of this is context. Confidence didn't get handed to him. It was earned in situations most quarterbacks avoid. And when that context is ignored, the criticism stops being fair. It becomes selective. That's why voices close to him started speaking up. Because from the inside, the story looks very different. And once you hear what he's actually been asked to carry, the idea that he, entitled, doesn't hold up at all. If anything, it makes the criticism feel misplaced. And the next perspective makes that impossible to ignore. The people closest to Shedeur Sanders tell a story that almost never makes it into the hot takes. They talk about pressure most quarterbacks never face, about being asked to lead before the infrastructure existed, about stepping into programs with limited resources and being told you're the plan. Not next year, not eventually, right now. And instead of pushing back or asking for comfort, Sanders accepted it every single time. At Jackson State, he could have gone anywhere. Bigger stages, better facilities, more money. Instead, he chose uncertainty. He chose to help build something from the ground up, knowing full well the margin for error was thin. Then, just as he got established, the reset button was hit again, this time at Colorado. A one-win program, national skepticism, expectations that didn't match reality. And once again, he didn't flinch. According to those around him, there were moments when the situation bordered on unfair. Thin protection, roster gaps, expectations that didn't align with resources. Yet there was never public frustration, never excuses, just acceptance of the responsibility and a focus on moving forward. That's the part that gets lost in the noise. From the outside, it's easy to criticize decisions, stats, or outcomes without acknowledging the circumstances. But when you listen to people who have watched him up close, a different picture emerges. One of resilience, adaptability, and a willingness to shoulder blame that doesn't always belong to him. Which is why this moment in Cleveland feels so familiar. Another tough situation. Another fan base desperate for answers. Another quarterback being asked to carry weight that extends far beyond the playbook. The difference is that this time, the narrative is already forming before the foundation is even set. And if history is any indication, that might be the biggest mistake of all. If this situation feels familiar to Shedeur Sanders, it's because it is. When you strip away the logos and the history, the Cleveland Browns present the same challenge he's faced before. Talent scattered across the roster, a defense capable of winning games, and an offense that hasn't given its quarterback a fair chance to breathe, let alone thrive. The offensive line issues are obvious. Pressure comes early, protection breaks down fast, and when things go wrong, the quarterback becomes the easiest target. That's not development, that's survival mode. And asking any young QB to grow under those conditions is a gamble, no matter how gifted he is. Yet the conversation around Sanders skips over that context. Instead of asking whether the structure is helping him succeed, critics jump straight to results. Wins, losses, box scores, as if quarterbacks operate in isolation, as if history hasn't shown again and again that even elite talent struggles without support. What makes this even more frustrating for fans is that the Browns aren't far off. The defense is already competitive. A few offensive line upgrades, a reliable run game, a true number one receiver. These aren't fantasy fixes, they're realistic moves. And with those pieces in place, the entire outlook changes. That's why some supporters believe Cleveland is at a crossroads. They can either repeat the cycle, blame the quarterback, reset, start over, or finally commit to building the right way. Sanders doesn't need perfection. He needs protection, stability, and patience. The same things he's never fully had, yet somehow succeeded without. And that's the irony. The Browns might already have a quarterback built for chaos. The question is whether they're finally ready to stop creating it. Because if they aren't, this story won't end differently than the others. Here, where the conversation usually goes off the rails. Every time the Browns struggle, the instinct is the same: find a new quarterback, draft one, trade for one, reset the clock. But that reflex is exactly what's kept the Cleveland Browns stuck in neutral for so long. Because the real problems haven't changed, even as the quarterbacks have. Protection is the first issue. A young QB can't develop when he's constantly under pressure. Reads speed up, mechanics break down, confidence takes hits that don't show up on the stat sheet. Until the offensive line becomes reliable, not perfect, just reliable, no quarterback is going to look like the answer. Then there's the lack of balance. Without a consistent run game, defenses tee off. They sit on routes. They force throws into tight windows. That pressure doesn't just affect performance, it distorts evaluation. Suddenly, every mistake feels amplified and progress gets overlooked. And finally, there's the weapons problem. A true number one receiver changes everything. It creates margin. It gives the quarterback an outlet when the play breaks down. Right now, Cleveland has pieces, but not that anchor. And expecting Shedeur Sanders to elevate an incomplete offense without that support is asking history to repeat itself. The defense, ironically, has done its part. It's already good enough to win games, which makes the offensive shortcomings even more glaring. The gap isn't talent, it's structure. That's why some fans are pushing back against the QB debate entirely. They're asking a different question. What if the Browns stopped chasing replacements and started fixing the environment? Because if you give Sanders time, protection, and a real supporting cast, the evaluation becomes fair. And if it still doesn't work, at least the decision is honest. Right now, Cleveland doesn't need another quarterback. It needs to finally build like it believes in one. Just when the conversation around Cleveland felt settled, one name flipped the entire narrative upside down. Mike Tomlin. The moment reports surfaced that Tomlin could be stepping away from Pittsburgh, speculation exploded. Almost instantly, fans and analysts started connecting dots, some logical, some emotional, some purely hopeful. And before anyone could slow it down, Cleveland was pulled straight into the rumor mill. To be clear, nothing has been confirmed. No official interest, no meetings announced, but the idea alone was enough to change the tone. Why? Because Tomlin represents stability, authority, credibility, 18 years in one organization, a Super Bowl ring, a reputation for commanding locker rooms and maximizing talent. For a franchise like Cleveland, that kind of resume carries weight even as speculation. But here, where it gets complicated. Tomlin hasn't exactly been subtle in the past about questioning Brown's decisions. Comments about front office moves, subtle jabs about division trades, moments that hinted at skepticism toward how Cleveland operates. Nothing hostile, nothing definitive, but enough to raise eyebrows about fit, especially with the current leadership structure. And then there's the quarterback question. If Tomlin were ever seriously considered, it wouldn't just be about coaching philosophy. It would immediately become about alignment. Would he want to develop Shedeur Sanders? Or would he push for a different direction entirely? That single unknown is why the rumors matter as much as they do. Because this isn't just a coaching debate. It's a referendum on whether Cleveland stays the course or pivots again. The irony is that the Tomlin rumors didn't weaken the Sanders conversation. They intensified it. They forced fans to ask a bigger question. If a coach like Tomlin enters the picture, does Cleveland finally commit to building properly? Or does it chase authority over alignment? And that question doesn't have an easy answer. But it does set up the most important debate of all, because once Tomlin's name entered the mix, Cleveland's future stopped being hypothetical. Once Mike Tomlin entered the conversation, another name followed almost immediately: John Harbaugh. And that's when this stopped being about rumors and started feeling like a crossroads moment for the Cleveland Browns. On the surface, both coaches represent stability, experience, credibility, but the way they'd shape Cleveland's future couldn't be more different. Tomlin is culture first. He thrives on leadership, accountability, and locker room control. His teams rarely collapse even when talent fluctuates. If Tomlin were the choice, the message would be clear. Cleveland wants authority, structure, and instant respect. The question is whether that structure comes with patience or pressure, especially for a developing quarterback like Shedeur Sanders. Harbaugh, on the other hand, represents adaptability. He's reinvented systems, worked with different quarterback styles, and adjusted to roster changes without losing identity. A Harbaugh-led Browns team would likely emphasize development, flexibility, and long-term alignment over immediate domination. That approach naturally raises fewer questions about Sanders' runway. And that's why this decision matters so much. Choosing Tomlin could signal a win-now mindset, strong leadership, high expectations, and limited tolerance for growing pains. Choosing Harbaugh suggests something else entirely: a commitment to building, refining, and letting a quarterback grow into the role instead of forcing the role to change around him. Neither option is wrong, but they lead to very different futures. This isn't just about who coaches the team. It's about what kind of organization Cleveland wants to be. One that prioritizes command and control, or one that prioritizes evolution and patience. Because once that choice is made, everything else follows. The quarterback, the roster, the timeline. And Cleveland doesn't just get one chance to get that right. This is the moment where Cleveland has to decide who it really is. For years, the Cleveland Browns have lived in reaction mode. One setback leads to panic. One disappointing stretch leads to a reset. And almost every time, the quarterback becomes the symbol of failure, regardless of whether the structure around him was ever built to succeed. That's why this crossroads feels different. With Shedeur Sanders, Cleveland isn't dealing with an unknown. They're dealing with a player who has repeatedly stepped into broken situations and made them functional. Not perfect, not overnight, but competitive. And that distinction matters more than hot takes want to admit. The real question isn't whether Sanders can overcome adversity. History suggests he already has, multiple times. The real question is whether Cleveland can finally break its own pattern, whether it can resist the urge to chase the next fix and instead commit to building the right way. Because the pieces are there. A defense that can win games, a roster that's close, a quarterback who doesn't shy away from pressure. What's missing isn't talent, it's patience and alignment. And those aren't things you draft, they're choices you make. The coaching rumors, the debates, the noise around leadership, all of it points to a franchise standing at a fork in the road. One path leads back to the familiar cycle: blame, reset, repeat. The other demands discipline, trust, and the willingness to let development actually happen. Cleveland doesn't need another savior. It doesn't need another headline. It needs to decide whether this time will be different. Because if the Browns choose direction over desperation, they might finally stop asking why quarterbacks fail here and start answering why this one doesn't have to. And whatever they choose next won't just define a season. It will define the franchise.